Welcome and thank you for attending our annual meeting tonight. I'm going to begin with a very few number of introductions. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Stacy Johnson Myers, and I currently serve as the president of the River Falls School Board. I also want to introduce my colleagues on the board. Cindy Holbrook serves as the vice president. Bob Casey is a board member. Ellison Page serves as a board member. Mike Miller serves as the treasurer. Lindsay Curtis is a board member. And Ellen Tuchtenhagen serves as our clerk but is unable to be here this evening. There are two administrators who are going to present. Mr. Jamie Benson, that I think all of you know, our superintendent, and Ms. Lynette Coy, who is our new Director of Facilities and Finance. Are there, at this point, any nominations for chairperson? Are there any nominations for a chairperson?
I nominate Elaine Bauman.
Are there any other nominations for chairperson? If not, the nominations are closed, and Elaine Bauman is affirmed as chairperson of the annual meeting. Elaine?
Good evening. The agenda for our evening's meeting can be found on page 3 of the annual meeting booklet or on the screens above. I would like to appoint Eileen Brownlee, parliamentarian, for the annual meeting. Eileen Brownlee? Right here. Okay, thank you. And I appoint Amanda Taylor, clerk of the annual meeting. Amanda? Okay, thank you. I'm now going to ask Superintendent Jamie Benson to provide a State of the District presentation for us.
Thank you, Elaine. It's tradition at every annual meeting that we provide a community update on some of the most relevant happenings here in the district. And so I want to start off here. Bear with me as I get my technology up and running here. As I deal with the lights and the glare a bit. But first I want to mention that in June of 2022, our school board adopted a new strategic plan to include very specific value statements. And these are the values that all of the strategic plan was put together through community input. We had 3 listening sessions and a community survey. We had input from our staff. And we believe these values represent the vision that our community brought forth in that planning. Our mission, to inspire all students through challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning experiences. And I want to just share a couple of things specific to that mission. Our administrative team takes the strategic plan somewhat as their marching orders, as approved by the board. And this year we've developed these SMART goals to be very specific and measurable and achievable, and they have some time-bound goals set to them. And so on this slide, I'm pointing out on the right-hand side what 3 of the kind of the big ticket items that relate to pieces of our mission statement, providing students the challenging, engaging, and meaningful experiences. So we're going through a very comprehensive curriculum review cycle. We have a new process in place to do that across all grade levels and all subject areas. As you can imagine, that's not all going to get done this year, but it's a new beginning and a new adventure for us in that new process. Teacher PLC, that's Professional Learning Communities PLC. For those that are keeping your bingo scorecard with educational acronyms this evening. With that involves our staff coming together, working collaboratively, sharing and improving their craft. We also provide professional development to our staff. This year, a large focus is on responsive teaching practices. And before I go any further, I'm going to explain my mask, which is going to come off here right now. I'm wearing a mask because I had COVID last week, and I'm trying to be respectful of those that are here this evening to try to make sure that I'm not passing anything along to any of you, but at this time I'm, I think, distanced far enough that that's much less of a concern. We should celebrate at a meeting like this some of the many opportunities that we provide to our students. One of the highlights here, we have 165 different courses that are offered to our students here. Often when open enrollment requests come across my desk, those are forms that it's a request from a student attending in a neighboring district but wants to come here to this district. I often read in those applications the desire to come here is because of the many opportunities we offer that not every other district can provide. And we're proud of that. We appreciate the community support for that. And we have excellent staff that provides those different courses to our students. We've got different variety of sports and co-curricular programs. The engagement of our students, 84% of our student body participates in one or more of those sports or co-curricular activities. Character education, there's not another district in the state of Wisconsin that has received more awards, both state and national. We've received 27 of those awards to recognize the good work that we do around character education. And then I list a laundry list of other things that provide different experiences both in and out of the classroom for our students. We received a 4-star rating on the DPI's report card where they take many things together and basically give us a report card. They look at everything from attendance and graduation rates to reading and math scores. They look over a extended period of time. They look at individual year. They look at the growth of students from one year to the next. And we're proud of that 4-star rating along with these many other opportunities provided to our kiddos. We do have some challenges. I put the first one, the financial deficit, in yellow because I'm going to talk more about that tonight to help provide some background information as to the cause behind why we are in the position financially that we are. We have some other challenges. Staffing levels continues to be a challenge for us. We have fewer applicants than ever before. I wrote down paras on the slide because our paraprofessional teacher assistants is one of the most challenging positions for us to fill. Student mental health, social media influence on our students, and of course some of the political climate in our society that all contribute to challenges that we wrestle with as a school district. A quick slide to talk about our enrollment. Enrollment is tied to revenue, that story that I'm going to get into in a minute here. We had a professional demographer study that was done shortly after the strategic plan. We hired a demographer to help us look into the future regarding our enrollment trend, both in the near and far term. And so I wrote here, you can see the numbers by 2035. We're looking to grow in the elementary by 275 students, in the middle school 55, and high school 31. Our largest class sizes right now are at the high school, and as they're graduating out, we're just simply not seeing the same kind of numbers coming in at the lower grade levels. In the near term, we're going to see some pretty slow, moderate growth, I think, as time goes on, according to this study. Just by example, in the very near term, as of today, we have 35 students less in this district than we did when we ended the school year last June. Next slide, a little reality check on the state budget process. Perhaps you've been reading and hearing about some good news that have come to our district and others around the state with the legislative process that includes a 2-year budget from this year, 2023, through 2025. The legislative biennial budget always goes in that odd year, 2-year cycle. Yes, we got a little bit of good news, but it really doesn't create a long-term fix for us. There's a cliff repair that I call it here, and the cliff refers to the fact that the legislature gave us $0 for any per pupil increase in the last 2-year biennial budget. And so they did repair that. They backfilled that as they had indicated they understood the need to do so. And that accounts for some of what appears to be really good news, but again, it helps to backfill that gap that was lost in the last biennial budget. So here's a quick reality check for you. A revenue increase of $3.4 million, but we are going to have go off the books this $2 million worth of COVID federal relief monies. And so when you do the math, you can see the $1.4 million in new monies. And when you think about our district endured a 12% health insurance cost increase this year. We gave modest wage increases to our employees. We're in the people business. We have 80% of our budget is spent on the people that are in front of our kids every day. 80% of our budget is for compensation. I'll go back to this story a little bit about the explaining, if you were reading or hearing as if there was maybe a windfall of new school monies. I want to clarify some misperceptions that some may have about that. A little bit of a busy slide here, sorry for that, but basically here's the new deal. The legislature said that there will be no district in Wisconsin that will receive less than $11,000, so that's what I have for that top number. You'll get $11,000 per pupil. We used to be at $10,000. And so a $1,000 per pupil increase may sound like a fair amount of money. Those two arrows point to the fact that 400 of that is to repair the cliff that I mentioned a minute ago. The next 400 would be considered a typical kind of a normal round of funding. And so 800 of that $1,000 bump was really not helping us in the long term at all. Here's where we used to rank. In 2022, our overall cost per pupil ranking is 333 out of 421 districts in the state. And that number reflects, when you talk about cost per pupil, that's a little different than the revenue per pupil. And it sounds complicated, and I guess it is, but the cost number reflects other federal aid money that comes to our district. And when you look at the middle yellow note that I have, where I see in 2023, so now we get to celebrate, sarcasm intended, that we're tied for dead last. We're tied for dead last out of 421 districts. The new legislative budget process said no district will get less than 11,000, and that's where we're at. We're at 11,000. So when you ask yourself, what's the cause? How do we get here? How do we hit this financial wall? It goes back to the formula that is used today by the state to determine our revenue has everything to do with a 1993 formula. And it was based on the spending that districts had at that time, and it continues to move us forward today. I mentioned our enrollment trend is changing. That impacts revenue. Inflation is outpacing, frankly, our revenues that are coming in. So a quick explanation in greater detail on this revenue limit, because every district has a limit on the amount of revenue that you're allowed to educate your kids, and that limit is determined by the state through that 1993 formula. The revenue limit, all public schools are restricted by these limits. State aid and your property taxes is what makes up the money for that revenue cap. If one goes up, the other goes down. In other words, if you get more aid from the state, then you pay less in taxes. You get less in aid from the state, then there's more on the local tax. Right now, I mentioned that revenue pie is $11,000. Here's a peek at how this revenue formula works differently across the state of Wisconsin. I was a slide behind here, sorry. So we're at 11,000. Our neighbors to the north, Hudson, they get 12,678 per pupil. Yes, they get an extra 1,678 per pupil to educate their children. And you can see the other examples, Madison and Washington Island and so on. So it's different across the state. We are tied for last now because no district can have less than 11,000. So how do we address our low revenue? There's a couple ways of doing it. Either make budget cuts or see a big spike in your enrollment or go to your community and ask for a referendum. Right now, our bottom line, just from regular operational budget, our projected deficit right now, as it stands, we're looking at being $1 million short next year, 24-25. So we're okay for this school year right now. But we're looking at $1 million deficit next year. It grows to $2 million the year after, $3 million the year after that. We're going to need some help. So there's two types of referendum questions. I'll start with that first. So operational question is what I've been talking about. It's all about that revenue that we have for regular day-to-day operations, paying our employees, buying textbooks, furniture, learning materials, putting fuel in our buses, all of the day-to-day operational. That's our deficit problem. There's a second kind of a referendum question that can also be asked related to facilities, and we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute, but these are two separate questions. They must be separate questions. They cannot be blended into one question. So operational question. We have a survey out in our community. Literally, some of you may have received it in the mail today, and we're asking you for your feedback and input. What you tell the board on that survey, which is being conducted by an independent party, completely confidential. We're asking an operational question on there, and then we're asking some facility questions on there as well. Again, two separate questions. The first, operational, that's the day-to-day operations. The second would be more related to facility. So why are we in need of more support for our facilities? Has to do with we simply don't have enough in our annual budget to keep pace with the facility needs that we have was one. And some of our facility items were not financed in past referenda. And then, simply stated, there's these ongoing safety and security and general maintenance needs that affect what we need to do to provide a high-quality education for all of our kids. So it just boils down to there's some needs on there, there's some wants on there, and there's some special opportunities as a part of the facilities that are included in this survey, and we're anxious to hear your feedback on those questions. Some of the specifics you'll see on that survey are listed here. I don't necessarily need to go through those. You'll have time to read that on your own. Here's our process. Community survey, it's floating out there right now. Hit the mailboxes, literally today. The board is going to review the feedback that they received from you in that survey, and they'll have the rest of October. The survey closes on October 3. They'll use the rest of October and November to digest that information and look at your feedback and see what course you have provided to the board through your survey responses, so that then in December, no later than December 12th, the school board would establish a resolution, and that's a law that says they have to tell you in writing, they have to pass a resolution indicating exactly what will be on the ballot in February. What are the question or questions that you're going to ask us in February? By law, we have to tell you that no less than 70 days prior to that referendum, and that date will be no later than December 12, with a referendum slated for February 20. Process between the survey now and getting us to February will include the need, obviously, to help voters make an informed decision. You're going to decide whether any of the referendum will pass or if it won't. The school board won't decide, I won't decide. We'll all have our own voice at the ballot poll, but the community is going to carry the day, and so our job as a district will be to make sure that we're educating you so that you can make an informed decision in February. We'll do that through a number of different means, as mentioned on this slide. Lastly, I just want us to make sure that we take a meeting like this and celebrate. There's a lot of good things. It sounds a little doom and gloom when you have to go to the community and ask for money, but there's some great things going on here. Earlier slide talked about the many opportunities for our children in this district, and that has been supported by our community. Without that support in the past, our kids today wouldn't have those opportunities, that's for sure. So we thank you for that support to our kids and to our district. We've got great staff here, highly qualified, well-trained, staff that care and love our children. They develop relationships with our kids every day. They know that by doing that, developing relationships, they can teach them just about anything. This district has a great deal of pride and a long tradition of excellence. And again, that would not happen without the support of our community. And so we do have great schools. We got great kids, great parents, a great community. And I just want to thank and recognize that fact at this time. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Benson. I would now like to introduce Finance Director Lynette Coy to provide the 23-24 school year budget.
Good evening. Lynette Coy, Director of Finance and Facilities. And I'm going to ask Amanda to pull up the, this isn't in the booklet. And I'm going to build a little bit off of some things that Jamie has already presented related to revenue limit. So as Jamie mentioned in the, thank you. As Jamie mentioned in the 23-25 state budget, there was an increase in revenue limits. And so as mentioned, you may be hearing or reading about the significant investments that the state budget has made to public schools. And I just want to take a few minutes to look at how that applies directly to the budget that's being presented tonight. And again, some of this will be a repeat of what was already presented. Are you able to zoom in on that at all without it getting real weird? Okay. So as mentioned, what is revenue limit? It's the total amount of state equalization aid. So it's a specific piece of our state aid. There are other pieces of aid that we receive, but the state equalization aid is the largest piece of aid. And so revenue limit is made out of that and our local tax levy. So that's the combination of these two makes up the revenue limit, so the total revenue allowed by districts. As I mentioned, there is revenue outside of this limit, and that top little light blue bar is one of the things that we'll get to. So in these slides, the one on the left is 22-23, so last year, and the dark blue is our state aid, and the yellow is our tax levy, or for operating expenses. Things outside of this revenue limit are categorical aids, and state and federal grants, as well as some local fees and monies that we get in. So the way the revenue limit is calculated is by taking our 3-year membership average. So membership is just another kind of watered down version of our pupil count. So pupil count is a huge driver of our revenue limit. So it's taking that 3-year average, multiplying it by the revenue limit per member. And as we looked at last year, River Falls' 22-23 revenue limit per member was $10,033. So with the new state budget, there was an increase in per pupil revenue of $325, and then the low revenue ceiling, it's kind of an oxymoron, but the low revenue ceiling up to $11,000. So how does that actually work? Districts receive the $325 first, and then if they're still below the $11,000, they get the additional to move them to the $11,000. So for River Falls, that moved us to $11,000, and we got almost a $1,000 increase per member of revenue limit authority, which equals the $3.4 million that Jamie had already spoken about. So $3.4 million additional in revenue limit authority. Does that actually equate to $3.4 million additional revenue for the district? And the answer is unfortunately not. So if you look on page 7, and we're going to get to this, but if you look on page 7 of your booklet, when we apply this to the 23-24 budget, the district is estimating an increase in revenue of just over $1 million, not $3.4 million. So I just think that's an important piece to consider and to understand, that even though our revenue limit authority increased by $3.4 million, our general operating revenue is increasing by just over $1 million. And if you want to go back to that slide or that document. So that's what's being indicated here, and you can see the increase between 22-23 and 23-24 is really just that $1 million in total revenue. And you can see the increase, the red lines are where the revenue limit is being set. Jamie already mentioned why this is, because one of the large pieces of our revenue that was outside the limit was our COVID aid. And in 22-23, the district received that $2 million in COVID aid, and the state legislature asked districts to use that for ongoing operating expenses, rather than building that into additional revenue limit authority in the last biennium. So that's what River Falls did, and now that it's gone, that's what's creating this fiscal cliff that you've heard probably many times and what we've been talking about for a couple of years. So like I said, the revenue limit is a split between aid and local tax levy. So the estimate that we're receiving right now for aid for this coming year is an increase of about $1 million. So where does that remaining $2.4 million come from? The tax levy. And so we're going to get to that as well. You'll see that on page 12 in the booklet. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of explanation on how that revenue limit authority is being applied directly to our 23-24 budget. So beginning on page 6 is the school district budget. A condensed version of this was published in the local papers. This is a more detailed version of this. As you can see, we are presenting a balanced budget. And I'm just going to highlight a few key pieces of our budget that I think are noteworthy. So on page 6, if you go about halfway down, number 340 is payment for services, and that's our open enrollment in. So like Jamie mentioned, we have students that apply to attend River Falls that live outside the district, and that is the transfer of aid that we receive from those districts for those open enrollment students. So about $1.6 million. On the next page, at the top of page 7, 620 near the top is our general aid, state aid, and that's the estimate that I was referring to. So again, our estimate is showing about $1 million or $1.1 million additional in aid, and that will be certified in October. Another large piece of revenue that we receive is $690, which is our per pupil aid. And again, that's one of those pieces of aid that's outside of that revenue limit, so not included under that. $730. You'll notice a large decrease between 22-23 and 23-24, and that's the COVID aid. So you'll see that huge decrease because we've basically exhausted all of the aid that we received from that funding. Let's see. So as I mentioned earlier, page 7 shows that total revenue and financing sources increase of just over $1 million between 22-23 and what we're proposing for 23-24. So those are our general operating revenues. The next page is a little bit more detail in expenditures. And I will note that we are, again, total expenditures is the same as our revenue, so we are proposing a balanced budget for 23-24. The next set of funds are funds 21, 23, and 29. Those are our special project funds, and most of that is made up of our student activity accounts. Special Education Fund 27 is districts receive aid reimbursement for special education expenses. And so they need to qualify, but it's to the benefit of the districts to be able to code and expend anything outside of the general education on special education to Fund 27. And right now, last year we were receiving about 30% reimbursement. It's estimated that that will increase to about 33% this year. So not a huge increase, but certainly additional revenue. And then what I'd like to note on the next page, the top of page 9, is a transfer of it'll be about $3.8 million this coming year. So the aid that we receive for special education expenses, along with federal grants that we receive for special education, don't actually cover all of the expenses. And so we need to make a transfer every year from our general fund to cover those expenses. We have to zero out Fund 27 at the end of every year. It has to be at a zero. So that's that $3.8 million. And that is roughly 56% of our Fund 27 expenditures that comes from the general fund. Next set of funds is on page 11, and these are our debt service funds. The district does not have a Fund 38, but we do have Fund 39, and that's all taxpayer-approved debt. So in other words, those are referendums for facility needs that taxpayers have approved. And right now, the two main pieces of that debt are a 2011 referendum, and the most recent was the 2018 referendum. So those are the remaining pieces of debt. And you can see at the bottom of that section is the total outstanding debt at the end of last year, and then what will be total outstanding at the end of this year is the $43.5 million. Our next set of accounts are capital projects funds, and the district only has Fund 46. Fund 46 was created about 7 or 8 years ago, and districts could move funds, deposit funds into Fund 46, and when they deposited those funds then, they actually received aid on that expense, that transfer. And so for districts that were positively aided for all of their additional expenses, they were getting additional aid reimbursement from the state. It was a really positive thing. River Falls right now is kind of hovering at that 0 to negatively aided. So it's not necessarily financially beneficial for us to be moving those funds in there, but it is a good way to set some funds aside for some projects. And so River Falls has done that, and we expect that most of those funds will be spent down this year on some roofing projects, some of our final roofing projects at the middle school, which were done this summer and into the fall. Fund 46 requires a 10-year plan. Anything that's spent out of there has to be part of that 10-year plan, and those funds cannot be moved out for any other reason. Our Fund 50 is our food service fund. So anything related to school nutrition runs through Fund 50. The district contracts with Chartwells for providing nutrition to our students. Many districts, including River Falls, built up a pretty healthy fund balance in Fund 50 over the last couple of years. Meals were free, and the federal government was reimbursing districts at a much higher rate per meal than they had been in the past. And so many districts, like I said, have built up a fund balance. And so what we have done here in River Falls is targeted some replacement of equipment and things to spend down those funds. DPI does not want us carrying a large fund in fund balance, and those funds need to be used for school nutrition. They cannot be moved out for any other reason. And also because of that, we also did not raise the meal prices for this year. Our final set of funds are Fund 80 and our Community Ed and Kids Club run through those. And then you'll see the proposed property tax levy. We have a levy for our general fund. We have a levy for our referendum or debt service fund. And then we also have a small levy for our community service fund as well. We have a Fund 73 or other post-retirement benefits or OPEB. And so there are some facts there listed in the booklet on how those are running. That was opened up in 2007-08 and currently has a balance of $4.8 million. On page 13, we have a graph or chart of our revenue sources, so kind of breaks down between, this is just our general and our special ed fund, so Fund 10 and Fund 27. And you can see that the largest portion of that is our state funding through equalization aid, per pupil aid, and that does not include the $3.8 million transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. And then the next chart is our expense objects. And why I like to do this is it kind of puts a exclamation mark on what Jamie had said earlier, that we really are in the people business. And our salary and benefits for just those two funds make up about just over 77% of our budget there. So the next page, page 14, we have some area districts and their mill rates from last year. So these are from last year because no one has actually set their mill rates or their levy for this year. So these are last year's, and it's a good way to compare where school taxes are in area districts. So for example, a property valued at $300,000, the average taxpayer in River Falls will pay just over $2,000 in school taxes, and in Hudson would pay just over $2,600 for the same value of property. So that's where those mill rates come into play. And then the bottom is our mill rate history. So as you can see, it's been quite a decline over the last 8 years in mill rate. Not unusual, many districts have seen that, especially in the last couple of years, where we've seen historic increases in property values. So you're gonna see that in many districts, see that decrease. And speaking of property values, we do have some estimates of property values for our area for 2023. These will be certified in October. And like I mentioned, our state aid is certified in October, and then our property values are also certified in October. So that is, after those two big pieces come out, that is when the board will actually set the levy and certify that to municipalities. So these are our 9 municipalities. You can see that the city of River Falls is broken up into 2 because we are split between 2 different counties. But in total, city of River Falls makes up about 48% of our property values. So we will continue to update our budget. We've got the 2 key pieces that we still need, which is property values and state aid. And then, like I mentioned, the board will officially adopt the budget and certify the tax levy at the October meeting. That's all I have.
Thank you, Director Coy. And at this point, I believe we are ready to start the discussion or to take action on resolutions that appear on page 16. Have the board salaries for the year, or the has that been posted? Yes, okay, so all right. Currently, the board members currently receive $3,200 annually, with the exception of the president, clerk, and treasurer, who receive $3,600 annually. And the motion is to approve the salaries. Do I have a motion from the floor to approve the salaries for the board? Lorraine Davis? Lorraine, there has been a motion to approve the salaries for the board. Do I have a second? Yes, name? Okay, Bonnie Jones Bethune. Second. We will take a voice ballot to start out with here. All in favor of setting the board salaries at $3,200 for members and $3,600 for officers, please respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We're going to next go to Resolution 2, which is to set the tax levy for 2023-24 school year. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution to set the tax levy as presented on page 12? It's hard to see here. Do I have a motion to set the levy as presented on page 12 of the booklet? Yes, please. Jennifer Willis, Jennifer Willis Cabrera, okay? And do I have a second? Second, Cheryl Maplethorpe. Okay, we have a motion and a second to set the levy for the 2023-24 year, and we will do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion carries. We're going to go to our third resolution, and I'm going to let Mr. Benson do a little explanation here.
Most everything that's transpired here this evening is very much status quo, typical annual meeting. This particular item on our agenda is unique. It's not something that falls on every annual meeting. The state of Wisconsin has a law that anytime a school district either wants to buy or sell property, that they have to, there's some legal posting requirements. You have to post it a couple different times as per. The same is true with the annual meeting. To sell or purchase property, it has to be up to the electors in the community to say yes or no to it. It can't be done by the school board alone. And so the backstory to this particular land purchase, there's a house on a lot that is located near our transportation center. And Amanda's going to pull up a picture to give you a little visual here. So the white buildings, that's our bus garage, as we affectionately call it. Maintenance shop, office space that I mentioned, it was built in 1942. That adjoining red box is the property that we're bringing before you tonight. Again, basically, if you traced our property where the buildings are, you see buses parked in the back and drew a square. I refer to that as that's like a small city block. But on the corner of that city block is this house owned by somebody else. And so we've been discussing with the landowner and their realtor the possibility of making a purchase of that property, basically as an investment for the future. Right now we have, as you can see there, some buses and some other vehicles that there is no indoor room for storage. Some other future options could include the need for us to have a new facility. That's one of the questions, by the way, on our survey that's sent out to you. Whether or not that ends up being a referendum question remains to be seen, but there's some options that this property provides us there. The day is going to come. It may start with other vehicles, but it will eventually land that the day will come eventually that I would suspect we'll have electronic buses and we'll need charging stations for any and all of those vehicles. And so this is being viewed by the board and by the district as a wise investment into the future to create some options. The resolution before you basically says that you give authority to the school board to proceed with negotiating the terms and the conditions of said purchase. And so Elaine has a formal resolution that Amanda has put up on the board. It's basically it's just a way of summarizing in a little more legal terms, perhaps, of what I just said to you. That this resolution, I'll read it. Whereas the school board of the School District of River Falls has reported to this meeting that the acquisition of land is needed for the purpose of expanding the district's transportation facilities, as our current facilities are outdated and there's a lack of space for expansion. Whereas after study and review, the board has recommended to this meeting that the purchase of the following described parcel of real estate that adjoins the current transportation facility site secures flexibility and space for future transportation needs and allows for the continued use of our existing property. Whereas the location of the transportation facilities at the existing location provides central access to all of our geographic areas in the district. Now therefore be it resolved by the electors of the School District of River Falls assembled in the annual district meeting on September 18, 2023 as follows. Number one, it is hereby determined that additional space is needed for the purpose of expanding the district's transportation facilities. Number two, the school board of the school district is hereby authorized to acquire the real estate described below for such purposes. The real estate authorized to be acquired described, and it just says Lot 1 and 2, Block 101. It states the address, 807 West Locust Street here in River Falls. The school board of this school district is hereby further authorized to negotiate the terms and conditions of said acquisition, to acquire said real estate under terms and conditions it deems favorable to the district, and to take any and all steps necessary to acquire said real estate adopted on this date, yada, yada, yada. I'll turn it back to you for, oh,
Thank you for reading all that. And now I get to ask the question, do we have a motion to a motion to approve the resolution to acquire the real estate described by Mr. Benson? Do I have a motion to approve the resolution? Motion made by Raleigh Janetsky. Do I have a second? Second by Mike Thompson. All in favor? Oh, excuse me. Is there any discussion of this? Questions or discussions?
Hi, my name is Jules Nickham. The discussion that I would just like a clarification on the justification as it relates to the electric part of the real estate purchase.
your question is specific to how the vote is taken, or? what it-
No, there was just discussion last month, and there's obviously a lot of opposing environmental. I know you had stated, I believe, that we will have electric buses in the future.
Oh,
but
well,
that's
yeah, that. you-
remain to be seen, and so I wanted to just let the people here know before we vote the cost of that, the probability of that as it relates to this community and the actuality of electric cars in an electric world. And so I would like to just let people know some of those financial things that were discussed last month, and also what I'm asking specifically is what is this justification for as it relates to transportation, as it relates to
Well,
electric
yep,
justification?
I'll start by saying that I personally chose to put into the mix the conversation, or the suggestion, when I was trying to give a little laundry list of flexible options as to justifying why this would be a wise purchase for the school district. And on my laundry list of options, additional storage for the vehicles, some of which you could see on that picture are currently outdoors. I listed in the laundry list the possibility of electric vehicles in the future.
Well,
we've had very minimal.
You said it was for, you said it again. You said that this was a justification for the electric buses in the future.
And I really appreciate that you're raising that question.
Thank
and
you. I appreciate you having the
and
discussion.
I'll attempt to clarify. The conversation that the school board has had about any kind of electric buses has been more what I'll call a moonshot conversation, more very general, very generic, very vanilla as far as questioning whether or not, for example, our district ever looks into what the cost implications are to someday, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I don't know when that someday comes, to someday consider the possibility of having electric vehicles in our fleet. And I'll tell you, the only movement in that direction whatsoever is that our transportation director attended one fairly recent month or two ago, went to like a workshop to learn more about, I think, some of what maybe you're alluding to, like what would the cost of one of those vehicles be? More than 2 times what we pay for a bus right now. What would the cost be to install electrical charging stations? I don't have the numbers on that, but I'm not sure if I'm agreeing with you or not, but I want to try to clarify that I was speaking more in visionary terms. There's been zero commitment at the school board level that anytime soon they intend to convert to electric buses. Quite frankly, we couldn't afford it.
So can you just justify what this purchase would be for as it relates to transportation and buses?
Yeah, and to do that, hang on one second. To do that, I will refer to the actual resolution, which is the technical piece of what's being voted on, and nowhere in this resolution does it use the word electric anything. It talks more about, as I read, expanding the district's transportation facilities as the current facilities are outdated and there's a lack of space. After review and study, the board has recommended to this meeting the purchase of the property that adjoins our current transportation facility. It secures flexibility and space for future transportation needs. Yada, yada, yada. No, nothing in this resolution calls for anybody in this room would be voting on whether or not we're going to get electric vehicles or not, to be very clear on that.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question.
Is there other discussion or questions? Any other questions? I'm sorry, it's difficult to see up here with the lights. Right. Hearing none, we will call for the vote, and we'll do a show of hands. All in favor of the resolution to acquire the real estate for 2023-24, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.